if you don't love Rashi, so you wonder why are we doing this all the time? What is every so all the Sephardic boys who went to that school, they would be invited to give a dirasha, and every single time they quote a pasuk, and Rashi says, right? What if I don't want to hear about that, right? So I once had this. One of the last ones they invited me for, I was maybe 18 or 19. I said, I wanted, as the was Perashat Kedoshim, and I said, I want to know what the Peshat of this is. So when you want to know the Peshat, where do you go? Abraham ibn Azra. So I said that, and then I quoted Ibn Azra says, it doesn't mean, hello, Heather, I love you. No, it means you don't do to him what you don't want him to do to you. Kamocha means you treat him the same way you'd want to be treated, right? That's fine. They didn't like it that I said, if you want to know the Peshat, you look up Abraham and Azra. And yet in the audience, some of the complainers, you know what their last name was? Ben Ezra.
Oh, wow.
What type of irony? This type of irony is kind of like avant-garde cinema of the 1950s, yes? Someone named Ben Ezra is complaining that you like Abraham and Azra. If it was not so tragic, it would be comic, right? Okay, so they tell you HaRambam's an Aristotelian, and he loves Aristotle and Rabbi Maimon, the rabbi of the synagogue, right? Who traded on being an immigrant and knowing like the customs, and but some of them he Kabbalized up the kind of. My papa didn't do the customs he says is our custom, right? Right, and all this thing of the Savanadim hammering day and night of what's the custom. Why don't you teach a Shodesh? My father complained at the end of his life. You know, I went there for 60 years, every Shabbat. And I don't know Hebrew, I don't know, but I'm sitting there. I don't even know the Tefillah I'm reading, because when we went to Kitab, they just had us read. And then I hear all this stuff, what Hashem wants, and Soloveitchik said, no one ever taught me a basic pasuk. I don't even know what the Shodashim are. I don't know how you find out, if you see a word, how to find what the Shodesh is, right? No, but you over 50 years, you could teach a Kahal, basic Hebrew. Why don't you teach 2 Shodashim every week and throw in the necessary grammar, like if it's Hipa'el, this Tav is not part of the Shodesh, right? Or the Mem and the Mebazeh or Mishaber, the Mem in the present tense and Pi'el is not part of the Shodesh, so ignore it, right? No. So they said HaRambam is Aristotelian, and Rabbi Maimon even said, if Aristotle would have converted, he would have been, Maimonides would have found him to be his favorite Jew. Like that was the best possible thing if Aristotle would have converted, but he didn't, of course. But so HaRambam is all, whatever Aristotle says is imputed to HaRambam. So I never, ever, ever liked that. So now I want to, that's why I'm, the Tobavara about it always bothered me. And that led me to do these kind of studies. So here we go. Where is, oh, I have to open it. Okay. There we go. Here we go. I think it's 107. Yes, okay. So here's what HaRambam really said about Aristotle. I mean, he just said it at the naked crowd there. And we'll finish with this. This is it. The fault with Aristotle, I think it's 4 pages.
When's the beginning?
Yeah, let me do that. And you know what? Let me get you. No, I'll look at that. But I'll zoom it there. Sure. Page 105 or something. When I read this, I said, you know, you want to know why I say that this Hacham knows more than Moshe Feinstein? It's because of this, because it answered my questions. Mm-hmm. And it's okay. You can love Moshe Feinstein. It doesn't. I don't think you're pasul because you like Moshe Feinstein. I think you're deluded by Tobavara. I think you went to many things I saw. There's a Sephardic inferiority complex, and the young boys who are grandchildren of immigrants, they go to yeshiva because you go to Flatbush or Magen David. You hear all the time from the beginning. Study Torah, right? Talmud. Okay, where do you study Talmud? There is no midrash that teaches Talmud the Andalusian way. Okay, I know that. And there probably wasn't that many in the last 100 years. Like when Faur studied, he went to the home of Shaul Frevet, went to the home of Eliyahu Suli. And in his own little midrash in the house, that's where there were students. Actually, he had a partner who died. I forgot his name. But he was a young man, and he and Faur studied together in Argentina. I forgot his name. Something happened. He died. I don't know what happened. But it was like a best friend. Okay. So, as mentioned before, Maimonides regarded Aristotle as the highest representation of pagan humanity. For all the Tov Vara that the gods impute to the world, and therefore they carve it up into little pieces, as the god of the ocean, and the god of the nether, the cereals, and the god of snow, and the god of rain. And we say Mashib Haruach, Morid HaGeshem, that's a direct hit on that, right? But that's pagan. So Aristotle at least tried to understand some phenomena, right? Like primitive genetics, like why do the cows give birth to cows, but they don't mate with donkey, all this kind of stuff. Botany a little bit. This perception passed from Maimonides to other philosophers in the Middle Ages, including the scholastics. Modern scholars have confused esteem with subservience. Why is that? Again, they're projecting their own psyche. When you worship the big rabbi, you are subservient. Like you just want to quote him. You don't even know why he said what he said. You just quote the conclusions, right? Well, Moshe Feinstein says you could drink milk of halal companies. Yeah, do you know that he ripped off the entire Tisha B'Av from Hizkiah da Silva? It doesn't tell you that. Hizkiah da Silva had the same conclusion in the Netherlands, Amsterdam, 200 years, 300 years before. How come we're not saying that, right? Okay. Surmising that Maimonides had invested Aristotle with authoritas, the big rabbi syndrome, right? This is not the case. In sharp contrast with the scholastics, Maimonides rejected the notion of authoritas. It doesn't matter who said it, it matters what was said, and you have to prove why what they said is true. Concerning physical phenomena, Maimonides formulated the principle that facts do not follow opinions, but true opinions ought to follow the facts. Ben Shapiro says something similar, right? Okay. He could have cited Aristotle. Instead, he cited Themistius, a minor philosopher. The message is clear. Rejection of authoritas is not the effect of authoritas. You can't quote a big rabbi to tell you you shouldn't listen to big rabbis, right? Okay. Explicitly, Maimonides dismissed the notion of authoritas in the realm of physics and metaphysics. Although Maimonides regarded Aristotelian physics as sound, this was because he believed that Aristotle's physics was usually demonstrable. He pointed out, however, that when contradicted by factual datum, Aristotelian physics is also to be rejected. I shall not contradict at all that which he had actually proven, he declared. What counts is the proof, ul-burhan, not who proved it. This principle applies even to Jewish law. Concerning the application of Greek astronomy for the computation of the Jewish calendar, I'll skip that part. He's just more or less saying
we could rely on their calculations because
they're real, they work. That's right. So it doesn't matter. And do we care if the tribe of Issachar, who was master at the Kiddush HaChodesh, did they have the same algorithm as the Greeks? It doesn't matter. Right. Different societies can have different mathematics to get to the same place. Math is just a model. Right? Okay. Since the Aristotelian views on metaphysics and the trajectory of celestial bodies above the lunar orbit cannot be verified, they must be regarded as pure fabrication. Aristotelian astronomy does not conform with the real order of things, as HaRambam says. In general, Maimonides believed that the sciences at his time, Aristotle's, were inadequate and were not yet properly developed. After examining the Aristotelian views in light of contemporaneous astronomy, Maimonides concluded the truth is that he did not understand or hear about it at all because the mathematical sciences were not adequately developed at his time. And if he would have heard about it, meaning contemporary astronomy of the 12th century, he would have rejected it totally. And if he would have accepted it, he would have been totally perplexed, hayran, about all that which he had proposed on this subject. So much for worshiping Aristotle. Maimonides censured those philosophers who invested Aristotle with authoritas, claiming that whatever Aristotle mentioned is categorically proven, burhan, with no doubt whatsoever. But there is no burhan. You have to show the burhan. Burhan is only valuable if you say what it is, right?
For them, it is hideous to either disagree with him or to attribute to him ignorance of something or an error on any subject. This is very similar to what Bauer calls the inerrantly pious rabbis of the anti-Maimonides. They can't make a mistake. Some Aristotelian views were plainly unscientific and a leading cause of the dissemination of harmful misconceptions. Carefully distinguishing Aristotelian metaphysics and astronomy from Aristotelian physics, Maimonides introduced the following critical principle. Let me formulate a general principle. Although I am quite aware that many of the Aristotelian zealots would attribute this to my lack of understanding or to being deliberately misleading, I will not refrain on this account from expressing what I perceived and understood, my limitations notwithstanding. The general principle is, whatever Aristotle said about all that which exists below the moon sphere up to the center of the earth, and we would really say down through the center of the earth, is undoubtedly true. No one would differ from him unless he has either misunderstood him or has already formed an opinion that he now wants to defend, or because those views lead him to deny a factual data. Aristotle's discussions on subjects from the moon sphere and above, however, are a kind of conjecture and fancy, except for a few items. This is all the more true in his discussions about the order of the intelligences without form. That's exactly right. And some of those theological opinions that he happened to believe in, containing many absurdities and resulting in palpable harm that is evident among all the nations and the cause for the propagation of injury. There is no proof on them. Now, here's the important part. The last sentence, that Aristotle had conducted his investigation without the benefit of apodictic proof, we would call experimentally repeatable results, right? Like we say, how do we know the speed of light? The light isn't moving in a medium, but it's moving in a vacuum. The Michelson-Morley experiment. Everybody knows that they took some lasers and they set them up, and I've seen it. I've seen it done in physics class, right? So now it does prove that the light is not moving in an ether like waves in the ocean. There is no ocean. They just move in a vacuum. That's why we always talk about the speed of light in a vacuum, right? Okay, and we can calculate what it is. And then with Einstein, he showed certain things, but the Burahim showed up in 50 years following Einstein. So everything he said wasn't 100% provable. We had a theory. So you can disagree. Now they did some astronomical measurements, even in his day. And I think they went to some observatory in Peru. There's a whole story about it. The red shift proves the bending of light. It's a whole thing, right? No one has been able to show a burhan that disproves Einstein. On the one hand, okay, it is this critical principle by which to differentiate Aristotelian astronomy and metaphysics from his physics. On the one hand, whatever Aristotle mentioned about the sublunary world was carried on according to the rule of logic, qiyas. That's the Arabic cognate of hekesh, by the way. On the other hand, what lies in heaven, the human mind cannot apprehend except for the little measure acquired through mathematics, a science which, as noted by Maimonides, had not been sufficiently developed during Aristotle's time. Within the Aristotelian system, however, physics and metaphysics are interlinked. Therefore, by challenging Aristotelian metaphysics, which most of the guide is about metaphysics, right? Not about physics, Maimonides was, in fact, questioning the authority of Aristotelian physics. So how does the Rav and all those people insist that Maimonides is Aristotelian? Didn't read this? His question, first of all, he only says you could trust Aristotle from the sphere of the moon down. That means terrestrial phenomena. Botany and how plants grow and yada, yada, yada. How do you measure with shadows, the circumference of the earth, all that kind of thing. But that's not what the guide is about. So in what way is Maimonides Aristotelian? He just said, I reject all the so-called metaphysics. It is no wonder then that the 26 propositions to demonstrate the creation of the world based on Aristotelian physics were formulated in the introduction to part 2 and thus were excluded from the main body of the guide. They're not part of part 2. They're just hanging there before part 2, right? Maimonides' first reference to Aristotle is in the 5th chapter of the first part of the guide. You know how I teach sugyot? They come in clusters from different parts of the Talmud. So HaRambam says explicitly, when you read the guide, you start with chapter 1, then you read chapter, you master it, then you read chapter 2, and you've only mastered it when you can articulate how it builds on chapter 1 and in what way. Chapter 5 directly builds on chapter 2 that we just read in the following way. The chapter opens with a brief introductory remark about Aristotle and a reference to a passage in De Caelo that means about the heavens. It reads, as the leader of the philosophers proceeded in the investigation and demonstration of very profound subjects. He calls them Rais, the Philosophat. He proceeded in the Ilbahat. By the way, that means to investigate, but investigate with intensity. That's why, how do you say something that's a arduous task? A bahte. Exact same. That's a bahte is that. So if you want to discover something and in science, it's a bahte. There's no quick answer. Well, istidlal, or even you don't have a proof, you saw something that indicates something else. So Einstein saw something, he made E equals mc squared. You could extrapolate from that the red shift, which proves it. But at this point, before you prove it, E equals mc squared is only an istidlal of the red shift, that yes, light will bend in a gravitational field. It looks like it, but we can't prove it, right? He said by way of apology, he said by way of apology something to the effect that those examining his writing should not regard his investigation, yubhat, of this type of subject as an affront or audacity and impulsiveness for speaking of what he has no knowledge. Aristotle said this. You should forgive me if I'm jumping ahead. It should be ascribed rather to his yearning and struggle to find and acquire true beliefs, artikalat, as much as is humanly possible. Well, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Aristotle may have had great intentions, but when he said the words, what does he say? True beliefs. Truth is not an objective Platonic thing. So until you prove something, we don't know what's true. You can't just jump with a speculation. How do you know you're not projecting? Aristotle was not introduced by name, but by the title Rais, prince, in the sense of political leader. At first sight, this seems to be a sign of rank and deference. Upon consideration, the title is confusing. In the same chapter, Maimonides examined the story of the Asile B'nai Israel, and they vayiru et
Elohei Israel.
vahi. What is it? Pasuk vahi.
Ve'asile b'nei Israel lo shalach.
No, vayiru et Elohei Israel. That's right. Arsim hashamayim la'tohar. They saw God. This is at Sinai, right? They saw God, and under his feet were bricks, libnat, like lemeni, hasapir, of sapphire. And that color was like a transparent blue, like blue sky. What does that mean? Is it a good thing? It's not a good thing. HaRambam says it's not a good thing. The sapphire bricks on which God is standing are what the Greek called prima materia, that there's a substance, a building block of the universe that coexists with God, was not created. So God is standing on top of that. It's the old prima materia. Therefore, God doesn't have any control over the Ma'aseh Libnat HaSapir. They're just there. So then how did they get here? Eternally there? So how could you have an eternal universe? You know, like if someone writes a Sefer Torah, it's just here? Someone had to write it, right? How could this be, right? Okay. So they had a bad vision. And how do we know? Because they then they couldn't contain the someone says wants to join. I don't know how to join them at this point. Let's see. No, I don't know. Maybe someone came in and out. I don't know. Okay, never mind. They couldn't contain the nibuah like a regular nabi, like Moshe or Aharon, and Yechezkel, Yeshaya. So they had to go do some biological thing. They had to have eat and drink. Like they couldn't, you know what I mean? Couldn't contain it. You had to do something pleasurable, right? So the Maimonides does not give a translation of the word asileh. However, the educated reader, however, already knows that it is the exact translation of Rais the title used by Maimonides to introduce Aristotle. He's making a comparison between the Asilei B'nai Israel, who had a false vision, and the Rais al-Falasafat. Because of their political position, they felt that they could jump ahead. Like, if you don't know what you're viewing, then look the other way, like Moshe, right? Ki yareh mehabit el Adonai. If Moshe was yareh, Alahad kama v'kama, these Asilei B'nai Israel should have been, especially when they saw something confusing with prima materia, they should say, you know what? I'm not going to jump. Opposite, they did what Elisha did, more or less. They bit off more than they could chew, and it ruined them. By the way, in this chapter 5, 1:5, HaRambam shows that they died at Tab'ira. Nadab and Abihu died with burning shortly after. The Asilei B'nai Israel died at Tab'ira. They're all consumed by like a kind of fire. It's meant to send a message, right? So this is how it was rendered by the Aramaic Targum. The same Aramaic term, Rab Rebaya, was used by the Targum to translate Elohim, in which we just studied, Vihitim Kelohim. More poignant is the fact that Maimonides used the term Rais in the sense of a political leader, a political boss, and Riyasa in the sense of authoritarian, domineering. This is particularly disturbing in light of the fact that Maimonides associates political leadership with imagination, not reason. You get to be a successful politician by manipulating the Dimayon, which may explain why the Asilei B'nai Israel weren't careful about Dimayon, because a part of them felt, I got my position from having notoriety, having been respected as a leader, which involves some cunning intelligence, right? That's why they're all birthed. Finally, according to Maimonides, the princes, political leaders of the children of Israel, were guilty of charging impulsively into the field of esoterics and were punished for their affront. Generally, it is presumed that Aristotle was mentioned here as an authority by which to evaluate the princes of the children of Israel. It will be obvious in this discussion that the opposite was the case. The purpose was to assess Aristotle in light of the scripture. So if the Asilei B'nai Israel made an avon and they got burned up at Tab Era, and Aristotle made a worse avon, he jumped ahead, he abandoned Burahim in his Bahat, he just jumping. Alahat kama v'kama. So when you know all of this and you read the Arabic and you see Rais and the Asilei B'nai Israel and you know the Targum because we read Targum, or at least in the Mustarab community, there's no way on this earth you could paint HaRambam as an Aristotelian submissive. So this whole Jewish studies, in my opinion, is tainted. So it's hard. I mean, sometimes they say something true, but just about facts, or they saw a manuscript. I don't trust a word they say. Try to tell me how HaRambam thought, what his epistemology is. That contradicts the entire Jewish world that I'm in. But that's the way it goes. Okay, any questions? Because I am done at the moment, and we are past the time anyway. But I'll take some questions if you have any. I'll stop presenting. Oh, Robert. Okay, go ahead, Robert.
On Tover, is my mic working? It wasn't last time.
What's that?
Is my mic working? It wasn't last time.
We can hear you.
Great.
Yes.
So on Tover, given everything that you said, we still have to in some way know what's good and bad, right and wrong. So what is the mechanism for that? Right.
What do you mean good and bad? You follow the halakha. The point of view, the reason that the halakha is there is to guide you. Any kind of cultural or more moral analysis comes after performing the mitzvot, not before. The mitzvot don't need morality. Morality comes from the mitzvot.
And so that's what like informs or gives content to the notion of good and bad that one ought to have.
Well, we don't want a notion of good and bad. I mean, when the Torah says, you know, yeah, that means just the mitzvot. Don't worry about morality. Don't worry about philosophy. Don't worry about analysis. All that will reveal itself to you from practicing the mitzvot. Just like you don't ask a karate master, why do I need to make mawashi uke, which is a roundhouse kick? You do it 1,000 times, you'll know yourself the value of mawashi uke. I mean, mawashi giri. Mawashi uke is a round block. Some Western students of martial arts always want to know the reason before they practice the art. Don't ask, don't think, do. That's what Japanese masters say. Don't think, do. Just do what I said. It'll all come clear to you from within. You don't even need to ask. There's nothing to talk about. So there is no good and bad. You don't need good and bad. Forget about that. Just follow the law.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
No.
One other thing, I think it's interesting. I realized the Tov Vara seeps into the subconscious.
Yes.
It's like the Zohama.
That's why they call it
that's why
Zohama.
they call it Zohama.
Yeah, that's
Because
right.
it seeps in, and you have to.
You're unaware of
You
it.
can remove
Totally
it, but
unaware, right?
you can't just.
That's
it takes
right.
Time to,
Like when someone starts a speech with, well, what does Borei Olam want? There's a premise there that Borei Olam wants in that human sense, and no one's exposing that. So when you hear the answer, you could argue about the answer, but you've already lost yourself by buying into the premise, right? And that's the way with many Jewish things. So intellectual endeavors, right? So there's premises that are there. Like, for example, in yeshiva, they still believe that the Torah Shebe'al Peh was totally oral until like 900. How could you ever have, I can't study Mishnah from a text? How could I ever learn it? So there's one guy in each generation, maybe, who has a memory that could memorize everything. How does he teach his son? How does he teach his students? They don't have that memory. What are we supposed to do? And every time you want to know Mishnah, you have to go knock on his door. I forgot that is it kula shelo, kula sheli, right?
you couldn't keep anything very long.
It's impossible, right? So, but they have that premise. How come they never say that question? Yisrael Moshe Chazan wrote that question in the 1840 in his commentary on number 187, the famous one. And he shows how the Mustarab and early Sephardim all believed that the Torah Shebe'al Peh was written forever since Moshe Rabbeinu, but it was private notes. It could be in a school, but it was private notes of somebody. And then Rabbeinu HaKadosh that was a publication was new, not writing it, right? And he shows 100 different ways. Then he asks, how could the French perpetuate? They not only, here's the problem of Tov Vara, they accepted this so intensely that they changed the girsa of the Igeret Rabbi Shira Gaon to erase any mention of writing. So now you're so deluded that you think this book can't be right. There must be a real girsa that we don't have, which matches our theory. So we're going to change the girsa to fit that ideal girsa that we don't have.
Hamza points out a few examples. Like the moon was created for girsa.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it was Rabbi Yochanan Resh Lakish used to study from a book of.
Yes,
right?
yeah, 100 times. Yeah, in Golden Doves. Yes, textuality, the fourth article. Yes.
I have a question concerning the Etz Hayim. So
Yeah.
when Borei Olam says, "Me'etz da'ato v'ra lo tochel minenu," he's telling Adam that he can eat from Etz Hayim, but that he shouldn't use it as this tool of political power.
I mean, yes, but it's a metaphor, right? So it's your mental process. So eating from the Eitz HaHayim is expanding your knowledge of Emet Vashekir. But don't emphasize the Dimayon, because then everything will be transformed. There will be no Eitz HaHayim. You're going to transform it into something negative, right? It's their metaphor. You're not really eating. It's an internal process. But the only way to describe internal mental processes is to use external objects as metaphors.
Okay. And Dimayon is a function of Tselem Elohim?
Everybody has Dimayon. So the animals and the pre-Adamites, they have Dimayon. The Tselem Elohim is a quantum leap forward with intelligence, but that doesn't mean your Dimayon goes away.
Gotcha.
It just means in order for you to use it properly with the Tselem Elohim, you have to go through a kind of cleansing process. I mean, Adam Harishon didn't have to, because he was created in a way that yes, he has Dimayon, but he could use the Dimayon to further understand Emet Vasheker. The Hachamim say actually that Adam Harishon used to look from one end of the world to the other end. Huge. It's a the Talmud. They just say, well, how long was it? And have different answers, just to illustrate the power of that metaphor. But that's why in Homo Mysticus he says the path is first. Now that we're post Ais Hadad problem, and we have the Zohama of the Nahash, you have to first rein in your imagination with what you might call rationality. Then you go ahead and become post-rational. And that's the whole Ruach HaKodesh, the pathway to Ruach HaKodesh.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you.
So Olive Press. Oh, you are Olive Press. I didn't know that.
So the fact that it started with woman, does that take away from the universality of the man? It's kind of like splits it up then, takes away from humanity, kind of pins it on her, and like what's the deviation?
It's a good question. You notice in this chapter he never refers to Haba, he refers to Adam all the time in describing the dimension. So later on in part 3, I think, or maybe part 2, but I think part 3, some of part 3, Adam and Hava in this Dimayon story are aspects of humans. So both men and women have male and female aspects, what Jung called anima and animus. The temptation of the Dimayon came through more the anima, the female side, but in man too. It's not that Hava was sinning first and then she seduced Adam. In a sense, but this all happened in their minds. It was happening, it's the human mind. That's why HaRambam, if you read very carefully, and I didn't point it out, but if you read very carefully, especially in the Arabic, he never refers to Hava as doing all this. It's Adam really who did all this. So later on, he expands on the metaphor. So why is part Hava and why is part Adam, etc., etc.
So this would be more of our feminine side. That would be
yes, yeah. And even today, women see patterns better than men. Men tend to focus on a small thing, and women see patterns. And that's why when you redecorate the dining room, the walls and the wallpaper and the paint and the molding are going to match the table and the tablecloth and the silverware. Everything is kind of a whole pattern, a whole context at once. Men tend to have more, what Jung called a diffuse consciousness, and men have more focus. They focus on one item.
one thing at a time.
But the problem for the men is they ignore the context. So they get Greekized, and the thing is, you consider only one aspect in abstract, and you forget Zev is Gore. That's another thing. So you need both, actually. You need both. That's the whole point. But that's a little bit deep from the point of view of part 1, where we are. That's a little bit deep. But just suffice it to say, those are metaphoric in the sense that it's not split along male-female lines. Okay, I think.
Also, if we have time, but I wonder if the whole if the whole thing is more metaphorical for understanding and not, because he had the Hayim, right? And God was communicating with him, and meanwhile now he's sent out of Gan Eden. So now he still can develop his reason in the Elohim, but it takes a lot.
It's a lot harder. Yeah. So now he can't easily get sustenance like he could before. It's not that it's not possible, but he changed his trajectory, and so he exiled himself from Gan Eden and all the easy sustenance, and that's why HaRambam introduced at the very end. He was permitted to eat the la'ano, right? The pleasant ma'achalot, but now he lost that too. It's not that God took it away. You made it impossible. You don't see the path in you.
He has a mental cost of that.
That's right. He foreclosed himself. That's a big problem. Okay, thank you very, very much. If we would do this again, I would teach chapter 5 of Guide 1. Let me know if there's any interest. Probably not next week, but we could do it some following weeks. And thank you very much, and have a great holiday weekend.
Thanks,
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And the call for everyone.